Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel and podcast, Sanya Kilji. Every single time that I record an episode, I'm really trying to find someone who is interesting, has an interesting story. Stories really, I have a soft spot in my heart for really beautiful stories. And so when I met Suba Mustafa through Instagram, instantly fell in love with kind of the mission that she was working towards. And it's kind of, I think, rare to see this much bravery in someone so young. I'm going to go deep dive into her story, but just, a quick bit is that she traveled halfway across the world as a young woman to help hands-on during refugee camps and deliver aid. So when she talked to me about what she was doing on social media, I really wanted to help amplify her story as well as the story of those that were in the camps. So without further ado, Suba, thank you for joining me for today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could you tell everyone who's not, familiar with you already, just a little bit about who you are and what you're doing?
For sure. So, my name is Subha. I am 23 years old. I am Pakistani, but I was born and raised here in Canada. I am studying to become a doctor, so I'm starting medical school, but I've kind of always had a passion for humanitarian work and advocacy. So, recently I did my own fundraiser campaign for Syrian and Palestinian refugees. And as you mentioned, I traveled all the way to Jordan myself to kind of distribute the aid and meet all the refugees there. And now I'm doing another campaign for those refugees living in Lebanon. And inshallah, I'll be traveling there as well and documenting kind of the entire experience on my Instagram like I did last time.
Well, one thing that I personally really appreciated, well, and that's really big to both my husband and I, is that is that we want to make sure that there is transparency between like where we're giving our money and how much is actually given to people in need. And so one thing that was really, again, important is for me where I was giving my zakat, and I know that I gave you my zakat for this year, is that, okay, it's not just like a 50% management fee or a 50% marketing fee. No, it's actually legitimately going to people in need. And you actually documented like, okay, these are the people, these are the supplies that I purchased, this is who it's going to, I'm personally going to deliver aid. And not just that, one thing that was really beautiful also is that you partnered with Launch Good, which I recently partnered with them for stuff as well too, and that you are Zakat verified. So that's something that I really appreciated personally. And so talk a little bit about what it means to be Zakat approved and how your campaign is a perfect fit for anybody looking to give up their Zakat or to give their Zakat for this year.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, so zakat has to go to people in need. It can't go towards building a mosque or a school and stuff like that. So my campaign is zakat verified because the money does go directly to the refugees. Like as you mentioned, you gave your zakat, so 100% of that goes to the people. It doesn't go into fees or like transportation or things like that. It doesn't go into that. And so with my campaign, and as you mentioned, Launch Good is kind of awesome in that sense, where we were able to get his Zakat verified, to have people, to have that transparency. And that's why I kind of went that extra mile into documenting my experience before, because I know that usually you kind of just donate and then you forget about it. You don't really hear about it after. And so to have that kind of transparency, because I knew that I wanted to continue doing this kind of work. And so to show people, not only to show them where their money's going, but also you're raising awareness and you're kind of getting people to know the issue from a first person perspective. So, yeah.
Well, it really takes your money so much further in that sense, because you're reminded of the good deeds, the good actions, and what the impact of it. And it makes me so motivated to give every year. And we talked about this when we first met. Have a softer spot in my heart for refugees, just in particular refugees and orphans. And right now we're seeing just an epidemic all over. You've got the Palestinian refugees, of course, you've got refugees from Yemen, you've got refugees in Lebanon, you've got refugees from Ukraine right now, which is weird because you don't usually see white refugees essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got the Afghan refugees, even in Houston alone, my God, what the city that I'm from, we have thousands and thousands of refugees that have come in, and to be able to just give them a place, because I can't personally imagine being uprooted and just, you know, just not having anything, my home, anything. And it actually takes me back to my roots too. I don't think I mentioned this when we first met, but of course, a lot of us have this story where our grandparents were uprooted from India, and we're essentially trying to, they had just a few minutes to grab what they could and relocate and
Mm-hmm.
start Pakistan from scratch. So it's in our roots, I believe, to really make sure that we can support refugees. So talk to me about a little bit about what kind of items you are looking to donate this year, and what are some of the top things that you're going to use the money to purchase for these refugees.
So the money goes into, and on my fundraiser, there are these options as well. So there's like winter blankets. There's also gas. So in Lebanon, especially, the refugees are living in, there are a lot of camps there, and there are people living in tarp tents. So the gas is used for heating and also for cooking, because I know that the refugees there are kind of burning plastic, and they have these tiny little kids, and they're burning plastic in order to stay warm. So the money also goes into gas for cooking and for heating, and it also goes into food, food packs. Like we have these food packs that we make for that gives a month worth of food for our family. So there's that. The money also goes into medical aid, because there are so many medical issues. You can imagine when you're living in a tent, and yeah, so there's medical aid, food, blankets, gas, and kind of just all of the like emergency aid. That's mainly what the money goes into.
And it's crazy to think, like as a mom, like when I first had my baby, I had an entire room full of stuff. I had formula, I had diapers, I had wipes, I had different outfits because they grow so fast. I had a crib, I had safe sleeping bassinets, I had baby blankets and everything, like sleep sacks. And to think of these mothers, especially like how are you giving birth in a refugee camp? B, taking care of children in a refugee camp. C, feeding them. I can't even physically imagine. So one of the questions I had for you is, did you see a lot of kids in these camps, and like the ages, and how were they holding up? Was there even any schooling for them or any opportunities? And what did their day-to-day look like?
So in Jordan, I went to Zaatari camp, which is one of the world's largest refugee camps. So there's, I believe, over 70,000 refugees there, and it's not that much space. So out of those 70,000 refugees, nearly half of them are kids. And they're kids ranging from 1 to 18, 19, 20. And in terms of like all the, like, they have a lot of issues psychologically, and that's kind of a common theme that I saw. A lot of psychological and behavioral issues in terms of like, as you can imagine, with the trauma and living in a refugee camp. Like I met a 3-year-old boy who couldn't speak, he couldn't recognize his own mother. And it's just, it's so
Heartbreak.
sad.
Because
Yeah,
that
it's
stays with them
heartbreaking.
forever. The first 5 years is like the most critical for a child's development, the first three being about like 85%. And to go
Mhm.
through such shocking trauma, like there's no stability, there's no roots.
Exactly. And there was another girl, she was super young. Her brother was diagnosed with cancer. So her mother would have to take him and kind of look for, go to hospitals, like ask if they would do treatment, try to look for money. So this little girl would be stuck at home alone, and she developed really severe social anxiety to the point where she couldn't make friends, she couldn't even make eye contact with people, and she was just so overwhelmed. And seeing that, and these are kind of just a little like bit of the things that the kids there go through. And there is schooling, the kids go to school, and all of that. And they go to nurseries, they go to schools and stuff, which is kind of like nice to see that they have that kind of activity going on in their life and they're not just sitting there at home. But again, there are so many medical issues and behavioral issues that come about when you're living in a refugee camp. And unfortunately and fortunately, I was able to see all of that.
I mean, it really is a double-edged sword, or a bittersweet, in the sense that it's really difficult to see, but I know that it's going to shape who you are in your humanitarian work for the rest of your life. And I told you when I first met you, like, this is something I have personally wanted to do for, I can't even explain, like, for so long. But the one thing that's held me back is safety concerns. I've always been afraid to kind of go and do this type of work because I just didn't know, as a woman, going into, refugee camps or the Middle East, what safety would look like. So kind of talk to me about what safety precautions you took, and if at any point you felt unsafe in the camps, and just what precautions you took.
Yeah, so I actually partnered with an organization called HRF, and that kind of really eased my concerns and also my parents' concerns. Because again, I'm 23, I'm Desi, and so traveling halfway across the world by myself was a concern. And as you mentioned, in the Middle East, especially. So in terms of that, I don't think there was any time I felt unsafe because I had people with me. I think if I went completely alone, being a woman too, like I think that would be a little bit worse off. But I don't think there was any time I felt unsafe. And luckily, the people that I was with kind of could gauge what was an appropriate thing to do. I know for one of the centers that we went to distribute food, the area was kind of not that safe. So they kind of advised for us to kind of stay in the car. And some of the other guys and stuff, they went and they did that. But that was only one time. And yeah, but I don't think there was any time where I honestly felt like I wasn't safe. I had the time of my life. I had so much fun.
Well, I'm honestly just glad to hear that, because again, it's something that I really intend within, like, you've inspired me. Like, it's something I kept pushing off, like, oh, I'll do it one day, I'll do it one day. But every time I brought it up with my family, they were like, no, you're like this small, even though I'm like a grown ass woman, but I'm like short and little. So they all just assume that, like, I'm gonna get kidnapped easily or something. But one thing that
Mhm.
I personally want to do is definitely participate. But of course, since I haven't been able to yet, giving the money to someone to be able to do this is almost just as good. So I really encourage anybody, like, you don't have to travel to help. You can, again, you can donate, and you can also look into what the needs are of the local refugees. Like, my sister has done a lot of work with the Afghan refugees in Houston. She recently just did a huge Eid toy drive for all of the Afghan kids who came to the US with essentially nothing. And, it seems like
Oh,
there's a place, obviously, of course, emergency needs, and she did some food prep and stuff for them as well too. But to be able to give them that, I think, is very meaningful, especially on the day of Eid, and to welcome them into our city. So I want this conversation to encourage people, like, of course, it's Ramadan. We're looking for extra charity work. Of course, Zakat is an obligation on all Muslims, but what more can we possibly do? So, in the process of deciding that this is something that you wanted to go, a charity and a fund that you wanted to support, and one that you wanted to be involved with, not only with your time, but also your money, talk to me about, like, what that process looked like of finding this organization, committing to this, and what are some tips for humanitarian work in general for people wanting to get involved?
for sure. So, as I mentioned, like I've always been interested in this kind of stuff, and I agree. Honestly, you don't have to travel the world. There's so many things locally that you can do. Before I did this, I was a refugee mentor here in Toronto, and I think that's really useful because a lot of the refugees that come are alone and they don't have a support system. So if you can be a mentor and guide them to different resources, and if you're just there for them emotionally, honestly, that in itself is really commendable and respectable and would help them a lot. So there are always things locally that you can do, I would say. And I also taught classes online, English classes to students living in Yemen, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon before. So that's kind of where I developed my interest in the first place. And so for people looking to get involved in humanitarian work, like you can honestly just look into, do your research, find out what you're passionate about. I know that there are opportunities out there for people who want to go out and build schools or provide aid, but there's so much stuff locally that you can do. And now that after COVID, like so many things have become virtual, so you can also help people in that way. So find out what you're interested in and do your research. And I'm sure there's 10 million things out there for you to do. It's just about taking the initiative to go and do that.
Now, one thing that you mentioned to me that I'm curious about that I haven't asked you about before is, you mentioned that the kids are able to go to school, but are there any income opportunities within the camps for the refugees? Like, how are they eventually supposed to get on their feet and get replaced and rehomed? Like, is there any program, or are they kind of indefinitely in these camps until someone somewhere figures something out?
So that's a really good question. The thing is, over there, what we would say is our social security number or SIN number, what you kind of need to have a job. Over there, the refugees don't get that. And so they can't work really good, great jobs. They can't work any jobs at all unless it's like under the table, manual labor, things like that. And so for the kids, like I actually met a 15-year-old boy who couldn't read or write. The schools, he could go to school. There's a school in his neighborhood. He could definitely go there, but he doesn't go there because if he goes there and spends his day at school, how will he put food on the table at the end of the day? He has a mother, he has two brothers, and so he's 15, he can't read or write, and he works for 12 hours a day shoveling. And do you want to guess how much he makes?
I mean, it's heartbreaking. I mean, definitely our like maybe the entire minimum wage here in an entire day is my guess.
So for 12 hours a day of shoveling manual labor, he makes 2 JD, which is equivalent to like $3.
Oof.
And
That's
so,
when there's no way out. Like I can't even imagine like here we're like, oh, I hate my corporate job, etc. Blah blah blah. But like when you can't read, you can't write, you're just trying to put food on the table. And every single day of your life is about survival because you don't have the most fundamental needs.
mhm,
I can't even imagine. And one thing that stood out to me the most when I first spoke with you is like how every time you ask them how are you doing, it's alhamdulillah. Like they don't
mhm,
complain, they don't, or they're just grateful for every little thing that they have. And you mentioned to me that whenever you gave them anything, whether it even be a simple candy, like they would offer it back to you first. And it's like, what's crazy to me is that the people with the least tend to have the biggest hearts. And
it's so
yet the
true.
people with the most tend to be the most clingy with their funds. And
Mhm,
it's just hard to process exactly. It's
yeah,
really hard to process that. And I just hope that, especially since today is the last Friday of Ramadan, people take a minute to realize we have a lot. If we
mhm,
were to pray and thank and just give our gratitude to God for every single minute of every single day, we still could not be grateful enough for his blessings. So
yeah,
please, if you've even already given your zakat, still take a moment. I'm going to be linking Soba's campaign and her Instagram account under this video. I really want to urge people to donate again because it's like we're gonna and if you can't like if you want to see exactly where the money goes, go take a look at her pictures, go take a look at her feed. You can
mhm,
see exactly what she's done in the past, and with every year I'm sure you're going to get more and more refined with how to deliver aid, what type of things to do, and the more we give, the more
yeah,
that these people will receive. So any final
exactly. Yeah, I would just like to say that like For people who kind of have those reservations about like whether their donations make a difference, I know that just from my one trip, um, there's so many cases where, you know, there was a 4-year-old who, an 11-year-old actually, who, Palestinian refugee who, when he was 4 years old playing on the street, there was a bomb blast and half of his leg, he lost half of his leg. And since he was 4, he's been using that same prosthetic leg fit for a 4-year-old when he's now 11 years old. And so we were able to get him a new prosthetic leg, which is kind of like, it really changes people's lives and it changed his day-to-day life and everything. And I can't explain how much your donations actually make a difference. So whether it be to my campaign or any campaign, just please know that if the person is reliable, the organization, whatever it is, then don't hesitate. I can tell you guys about another case about a 24-year-old boy. When he was 14, he was sitting in a cafe doing his homework and he was shot with a sniper. And through the back, out the front, 2 wounds, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. And they didn't have the money to kind of get both of those wounds fixed. So for 10 years, he had a partially open wound that they would dress every single day.
No.
Every single day. And can you imagine like a 24-year-old, like you're in your prime, and to have that every single day, you have an open wound, you're paralyzed from the waist down because of what? This is when he was in Syria, when he was shot with a sniper for no reason. He was sitting doing his homework in a cafe. So there's so many stories like that. And with him too, we were just a couple months after I returned, I found out that his operation was able to happen, and now thankfully that wound is closed. And like there's so many people, kids, orphans. I met an orphan who he had an orphans fun day where we were playing with the kids and just eating and having fun. And there was an 8-year-old girl, her name was Haneen. I still think about her like every single day. We spent the day together, and even though she could only speak Arabic and I could only speak English, we still became really good friends. And halfway through the day, she was asking me a question and I couldn't understand what she was saying. And then I realized she was asking me, what's your mother's name? And so I told her my mother's name, and then she grabbed my hand and she hugged me and she said in Arabic, "May God give you your mother always." And so I can't even begin to explain, like, these kids are so strong, these people are so strong, they're so resilient. And in terms of refugees, again, kind of like how you mentioned, it's close to my heart too, because they say that the only thing that separates you from that differentiates you in a refugee is luck, because it could be any of us. That could happen to any of us. These are people who have lived their normal lives, and because of external circumstances out of their control, their lives have completely changed. And that could easily happen to any of us. And
there's no,
exactly.
I mean, the Ukrainians did not expect this, did not see this coming. I'm sure that the world is in shock seeing them because they look like us in the Western world.
Mhm.
And you know, it could be anyone's kid sitting in that cafe.
Exactly. And these are things that are, as you mentioned, like I talked to you before, and the people, they don't sit and whine and think about like, oh, why is my life like this? They are the most resilient, the most grateful, the strongest people that I've ever known and met. And which is why I have so much respect for them. So if anything, for people thinking like, oh, you're going there to help people, like I promise you, they will do so much more for you than you could ever do for them. What you're doing for them is worldly, what you're doing for them is temporary, and the prayers that they give you, the things that you learn from them, whether somebody's 60 or 6, as I mentioned before, like they'll say alhamdulillah. You ask them how they are, they'll say alhamdulillah. They're never going to say, oh man, today was a bad day, or oh, I can't feed my family. They'll never say that. They'll just say like, thank you to God that we're doing great. And the kids too, like imagine kids don't really have an understanding, right? You give them like candy, you give them new things, and you would expect them to just be like, oh my God, this is awesome, like they'll just eat it. But over there, You give them something nice, you give them candy that they're eating for the first time, they'll open it up and they'll give it to you. They won't eat it unless you eat it. So it's just so heartbreaking, and to know that there are so many people out there, guys, like 11 million refugees only from Syria. That's not including Palestine, that's not including Lebanon, that's not including Yemen, that's not including Ukraine, that's not including anywhere else. And there's so many people like that. And I know I was kind of living in a bubble before, although I knew all these things were happening. I kind of felt helpless because I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, there's nothing I can do, right? But it kind of took having that realization that tomorrow isn't promised. And if you have the good intention to do something good, you don't know if you're going to live a day, you don't know if you're going to live 5 years. I used to think, okay, when I become a doctor, like I can do all these things. But realistically, people need your help and they need it now. And I promise you, you will gain 10 times more from that than you will ever give to them. So please donate generously, not just to my campaign. If you see a campaign, please donate, because I promise it makes a difference.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on my channel. You know, I laugh because I get a lot of requests every single day to promote various nonprofits. And I don't know, God connected you and I, because usually, I mean, I just cannot promote as many that come in. But this one was, I don't know, this one just hit the spot for me and just really inspired me tremendously. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for everyone that watched and donates to her campaign. I'm going to again link everything below this video. I'm going to link it on Instagram stories and all of the above, where you can ask us more questions and of course comment any questions that you have. And we will catch you guys on the next episode of my YouTube podcast that has no name. Thank you.